Okay, thank you for being here today. And in this live session, Miss Anning, she is one of our math teacher. She will explain some key points of math with you. She graduated from a U.S. News Top 100 university. Okay, let's get started.
Hello everyone, welcome to this live session for math. In this session, I will help you go through and review all the concepts and knowledge you have learned in your recorded video and recorded lessons. So firstly, let's see the content. In this session, we will go through 4 parts. The first part is about math syllabus and key topics breakdown. So in this part, you will see different key points that you will encounter in your examination. In the second part, you will see the knowledge map, especially for some concepts you have learned before and key formula checklist. The formula that will be given in your examination, but the major point is that you have to get familiar with them. All right. And the third part is that we will discuss some high frequency questions about the solving strategies, especially about how to utilize the formula that was provided in part 2 to solve the question that was applicable and realistic. And lastly, you have the question and answer session, so you could discuss with me the difficulties as well as the points that you feel confused during your math topics, okay? Okay, so the first part, let's first go through the math syllabus. So here, what you have to pay attention is about the right-hand side, where you have different proportion of those topics that you will encounter in your math syllabus. And I have to emphasize, you need to lay some foundation on those high proportion. For example, here, this one and this one for functions and geometry and algebra. It's direct to see that those points is important because they have high proportion in your examination, all right? But what I mean, when you try to review the math topics, especially when you have multiple subjects, you may don't have so much time. So you could lay more foundation on this part, which have high proportion to help you, okay? In the left-hand side, we have the syllabus. So majorly, we have 4 parts here. The first one is sets and inequalities. And in this part, you will learn definition, operations, and representation of sets. This one is simple, but they're important because you will utilize them in probability as well. So you will have the calculation of intersection, union. This kind of thing will lay a foundation for probability, especially for independency, okay? The second part is about basic properties and solution methods of inequalities. This part actually go back to your equation, especially for your quadratic equation. So it's actually a transition from your equation to your inequalities, okay? Majorly, you have to learn about how to solve quadratic equation and make transformation into quadratic inequalities, okay? And second part, the functions. So for functions here, firstly, you have to learn the concepts and properties of functions, especially for how to solve the domain, how to determine your range, and monotonicity, let's say the increasing and decreasing functions, your parity, your odd and even function, how to decide them, how to recognize them, and figure them out in your examination, all right? I think that for all of you, you could try to use this table and try to have your pen and paper and try to note them down when you try to review those concepts in your examination. So you could have those memorization in your brain and to write down what you could remember about the topics, about knowledge, about question here to help you review in a quicker way, okay? And the second part, this one is important about basic elementary functions, which include power, exponential, logarithmic, and trigonometric functions. So majorly, you will encounter their combination as well. And thirdly, the sequences and series, where you have to learn general term formula and summation of arithmetic and geometric sequences or the progression. All right. So you need to learn how to get the common differences, common ratio, how to get the summation with a formula. Typically, this will be given in your examination. And lastly, you will learn the basic of derivatives and calculus, which should be divided into differentiation and integration. But in your examination, you will lay more emphasis on derivatives, let's say differentiation. So you have to know their definition, geometric meaning, or the physical meaning about the delta x and their approximation and simple applications. The third part, which is plane analytic geometry. So this part, majorly you have to determine the differences between those different circles, ellipse, hyperbola, parabola, and how to calculate the equation of your straight line and how to determine perpendicular and parallel. And vectors and complex number, this is easy for you, and you need to make some transition from two-dimensional to three-dimensional. Then, thirdly, you have solid geometry, include prism, circular, those kind of cuboid, and also some pyramid as well. Okay. Lastly, probability and statistics. In this part, you will have to discuss something about classical probability model, and you may also encounter geometric probability model as well, and probability calculation with their distribution, as well as those numerical characteristics, including some variables like mean, mode, median, variance, standard deviation. Here, some basic concepts for a normal distribution. For example, mu, sigma, how to determine the shape of the bear and what's the correlation with the distribution. All right. Hope this is clear. This is the concepts of your syllabus. In the next part, we will go through your knowledge map and key formula checklist. So the first one is sets and inequalities. You will see that we have notation and examples. I think all of you have already get familiar with those symbols. So I will not stop here, but I will emphasize that these two, you will see them in your examination because union and intersection is quite common. You will see some examples and questions look like this, right? You have to know how to write those symbols, what's the definition, what's the meaning of those symbols. Don't confuse them. And another point is that many students make mistakes about this too, because they are confused about belong and include. So this one is belong, and this one is include. Okay, so to give you an imagination, if one set belong to the other, you could see the symbol as smaller. So they are quite similar. And this one, you could see it as larger, but don't confuse yourself with these two symbols, all right? So one is subset of set and the other is superset of set, okay? And for this slide, we will see the properties of union and intersection. My suggestion is that please don't memorize them because they're complicated and there's no need for you to memorize them. What I recommend is that firstly, you could prove them. And secondly, you could combine those laws, for example, commutative, associative, identity, you could use these kind of things, all this kind of combination of law with examples. And you don't need to memorize those difficult points. You just need to use them with your formula and try to solve questions with examples, okay? And then let's see some inequality properties. So here for inequality, there are 3 points you have to pay attention to. The first one is that you have to know how to solve quadratic inequalities. The second one is that please pay attention to here. Whenever you are going to multiply or divide some constant, some number that was negative, please reverse your sign, right? And thirdly, is what has been given here about symbol, because lots of questions will need you to give some response and reply with intervals that was used both open and close bracket. So you have to know the differences between them and when to use them and how to answer your question with those kind of symbol. So this is what I had mentioned before. You need to multiply or divide on both sides of your inequality with some negative number. Okay, the second part is functions. So for functions, majorly, the first point is to determine your domain. I believe you have seen this kind of question before. So firstly, you have to find your domain, and then according to the domain, you will know your range, right? And then maybe you could go a step further to try to give a specific domain, a specific interval, and give a specific range that was corresponding. So you have 4 kinds of function, which is typical. The first one is rational function. So for this one, it's fractional. So by which I means your denominator cannot be 0, right? And for the second one, you have even root radical function, which is with square root. So the part that is under square root should be larger than or equal to 0. And for the third one, you have 0 exponent function, which means this part, your base, cannot be 0, but it can be negative, all right? It can be -3, -2. And the last one is combined function, which is more common because it's quite easy for you to just have 1, 2, and 3, but you have combined them together with those rational, even root radical, and other function. In this part, you will have multiple constraints and multiple requirements. For example, here, this cannot be 0. This one should be larger than or equal to 0. And you could use something that along with your number axis and to see their intersection and to find your answer. All right. The next part is how to determine whether it's a monotonic function, including your increasing function, decreasing function. But this is not important. The important part is that you have to transit this, your derivatives. For example, increasing function, you always have your derivatives that was larger than 0. For decreasing function, you always have your derivatives that was smaller than 0. All right, so firstly, you have to determine what's an increasing function with this definition. Secondly, you have to utilize this function, this idea, they're increasing and decreasing with the derivatives, okay? This four is not common, but you could use them in your examination when you have something look like this. This is a kind of composite function, and you need to determine their monotonicity. So in these cases, you have to divide them. For example, increasing and increasing is increasing, decreasing and decreasing is decreasing, increasing minus decreasing is increasing, etc. Right? So you could use this kind of formula here to help you decide the parts of those comprehensive functions. And also the definition of function parity. This one is interesting because you could use the parity of function to determine some specific value of your function. For example, for odd function, which can also be written in this way. Right? This is 0, 1. But typical odd function, cubic of x. For this one, you will have them symmetric around your origin. But for your odd function, you will have it that was symmetric surrounding your y-axis, right? So firstly, you need to determine what's odd function and what's even function. Secondly, you need to determine them with some specific value, how to use those idea and theory to help you calculate out the values of those functions with some specific point. Okay. Okay, in this slide, you have power function. For power function here, for example, y equals x, the square of x, the cubic of x, square root, and the reciprocal, right? So for this function here, what's important is that you need to know the domain, the range, the graph features, and especially for these two, okay? These two is important. An exponential function. So firstly, you need to learn the graph. The increasing part when a that was larger than 1, decreasing part when a that was smaller than 1 but larger than 0. And you have to know the calculation of those formula here. This can be given in your examination, but I recommend you to get familiar with all these kind of things. For example, how to calculate this, right? And this kind of exponential function can also be combined with logarithmic function, like these kind of things. This thing is also important, especially for the course, because they will often be used in your calculation. Maybe this can be a single question. You have multiplication, division, and you could move the power to the front, and you also have something look like this. All right, and you also have something look like this, right? So this thing should be bear in your mind and utilize them to solve some question, which can be combined with your exponential and trigonometric functions. This part is important for your physical meaning or geometric meaning, especially for this circle, because you have the circle with radius as 1 and you have the angle as theta, and also you will rotate it in a clockwise way with different angle that will correspond to different sine theta and cosine theta, which means it's actually like a wavelength. You will have something with the graph of both sine and cosine, which was rotate that was clockwise around the circle. And we have to bear this, the square of sine theta plus the square of cosine theta equals 1. All right. Yeah, and then you will encounter 2 slides of formula. There are some points that was important than others. For example, this one, this one, this one, and this one are more important than the others, okay? These are also important, but are not so common. But you have to pay attention to here because this often leads to mistakes because cosine A plus B is negative. All right, it's negative, but A minus B is positive. All right, so this is inverse. Okay, as I mentioned before, this one is important, this one is important. The other, this and this is important. All right, so you know the idea. The next concept is sequences and series. The first one is arithmetic, the second one is geometric. You may also see them as progression. For these things, there are 2 major points. The first one is that you have to know how to calculate for common differences, common ratio. And then you have to know how to calculate for the general term, as I mentioned here, and the sum formula. You don't need to remember this because this can be extended from this, right? So just know how to calculate the general term, the sum formula, how to point out their differences, their ratio, okay? So for geometric sequences, it's also similar, but what I have to mention here is that your ratio can be negative, all right? So you may see something as this. This is normal, all right? So this means your ratio is negative, and you have to pay attention here for your sum formula if you encounter something that you have common ratio, which is negative, which means this may lead to mistake because your sign here, right? So pay attention to this. Okay, and the next topic is calculus. For calculus, it's interesting, but you have to pay attention to differentiation or let's say derivatives. So firstly, let's say we have a movement along your x-axis, which is delta x, right? And correspondingly, you have a movement that was along the y-axis, which is delta y. In this case, when delta y was over delta x, you will have the gradient. However, pay attention to here. Just imagine that your delta x is quite smaller, and it can be squeezed into a very, very small triangle here. And in this case, you will have the approximation where your delta x is quite small, that was approaching zero. In this case, your gradient, the differentiation, and derivatives can be this part, right? The tangent line of this special point, which will also be applied in your physics. That was known as velocity. All right. So this is what I have mentioned before. When you do the approximation, your limits, your delta x will approach zero, and in this case, you will have your tangent line. Okay, and you will have lots of formula in this part. I think it will be given in your examination, but please pay attention to here. The derivative of cosine as minus sine x, and you have to learn this, this. Let's make it general. This. All right, so all these kind of derivatives, you have to know their formula and how to take combination of all of this. For example, what's the derivatives of this? All right. Okay, and also their combination as the multiplication, division. For multiplication, you will have something look like this. And what about the chaining rule if you have composite function? Right? How to take the derivatives of this? It should be right, the chaining rule. So both this kind of things, the chaining rule, the multiplication, division, the composition of all those functions should be used and utilized in your examination in a really quick way. Okay. And third part, geometry and algebra. So in this part, firstly, you need to learn how to calculate the straight lines of their equation. So this one is actually your gradient, or let's say your slope, and also the interception, how to calculate your y-interception, x-interception, how to use this kind of slope and interception to calculate the equation of a straight line, and how to change it into the general form, for example, here, right? And also how to calculate the distances, which is Euclidean distances here. And you should also translate that into your three-dimension or high dimension, which is the same. And also you have parallel and perpendicular. For example, you are given multiple lines and you know the equation of some of them. In this case, you have some conditions. However, what you have to do is try to calculate depending on their perpendicular and parallel. So you will get their slope and their interception, and you could calculate the equation of others, right? Okay, and method. Apart from this, you will learn different kinds of shape. For example, in your plane, you will have circle. You have standard equation and general equation, but this one is more important. and more common in your examination because this one is combined with your quadratic equation where you could use the completed square to help you make balance between your left-hand side and right-hand side, all right? And you need to know how to calculate for the radius, for the center of your circle, right? And their movement, okay? And also ellipse. So to make it quicker, you know ellipse, what's the shape? What's the differences when you have it on x-axis and y-axis? What's C, what's A, what's B here, right? What's the eccentricity? And also how to calculate for hyperbola, what hyperbola, and what's the asymptotes, right? What's A here, what's B here, and what's C here, right? And also about parabola, you have different kinds of ways for the opens of your right, upward, downward, left, right, and what's the directories and what's your focus, right? For example, here, right? So as I mentioned, this is a family of lines, of curves. Let's say parabola, hyperbola, circle, ellipse, and you have to know the differences between them in your examination. And for vectors, this is easy. So you know their representation, especially for unit vector, right? And you need to know how to do the operation, like addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, dot product, how to determine whether they are parallel or perpendicular, and how to determine your angle with your dot product. For example, how to determine 90 and how to determine pi here, right? This is simple. I will jump this and this. Okay, and complex numbers. This can be related to vectors, which you could represent complex numbers in a certain coordinates. And complex numbers is something that was completed union, which means it is divided into real numbers and imaginary numbers. So real numbers can be also divided into irrational, rational, integers, whole, etc. And imaginary numbers can be also divided into pure imaginary. I think you have already been familiar with this, but what I have mentioned here is that when you are asked about imaginary part, it's here, all right? It's for, it's not for I, right? It's B here. So pay attention to this. And you could also try to represent complex numbers in coordinates, as I mentioned before, and how to calculate for the modulus and for the magnitude, and how to calculate for the angle, which is outstanding here, right? Okay, for this slide, you don't need to memorize all of them. What you need to do is just try to utilize those formula to solve your question. This is the definition. This is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, right? So you need to know how to calculate those complex number with I. And this is conjugation. This is important. You don't need to know this. This is important, modulus and magnitude, and argument sometimes, all right? Solid geometry. In this part, you have already know different kind of shape, for example, cuboid, cylinder, sphere, triangular, prism, rectangular base, pyramid, cone, and you have to know how to determine their faces, vertex, edges, and how to unfold them with their net, right? You need to match the 3D shape with their, let's say 2D net, okay? And also, what's important is try to calculate the volume and your surface area. And especially when you try to divide those composite parts, right? How to try to calculate it in a quicker way. And you also encounter something with some hover and you have to cut it or you have to combine it, how to use all this kind of combination to calculate your volume and surface areas. Okay, the last part is probability and statistics. In this part, what you first need to learn is set, all right? So you have to get familiar with set first, and then you have to know the definition of classical probability. It's actually the number of ways events can occur that is over the total number of possible outcomes. And typical question like try to throw a die, try to use poker cards, and try to use something like you need to take some balls from your bags, right? This kind of questions. And also how to learn the probability distribution is that the probability is that no matter it was discrete or continuous random variable, you always have their summation and their integration as well. So for discrete variable, you have their summation as 1. For continuous variable, you have their integration as 1, right? You know how to draw the graph of those random variable with different probability, right? And you know how to count those possibility for the events. And lastly, it's about normal distribution. This is a continuous probability distribution, and this is important because lots of questions, lots of application in mathematics, in your life, in physics, you have to learn this, all right? So for this, two major parameters as mu, the mean, as well as the sigma, the variance. So for this two, you have to know how to compare them with the bear shape. So what's the meaning, what's the physical meaning and geometric meaning? That's when you try to move your bear shape with different and how you could represent the variance of your bear shape. For example, if your sigma is large, which means it's distributed. If it's small, which means you have a thin bear shape, right? It's very thin here. Okay. So as I mentioned, the integration is one of continuous distribution, and you have to know how to determine median, mean value, variance, which is look like this. You could also calculate it in this way, all right? Variance and standard deviation. Okay, in the third part, we will go through high frequency question solving strategies. I will not go deeper about each step of those questions, but I will show you some hints about how to solve this question and what we want to test for you in this question. The first one is you need to know how to solve quadratic inequality. We have that here. The main idea is that you have to know how to solve quadratic equations. So as I mentioned before, essence is equation. If you know how to solve quadratic equation, it's easy for you to solve those inequalities. And you need to know how to do factorization. And you could get this with factorization. But not only this, right? You have to know how to do factorization and how to draw the graph with your symmetric line, with the intersection of your x-axis and y-axis, and how to know the points, right? And you could get the range of your inequality. The second one, for this one, you need to know how to compare those exponential function. For example, let's say for a here, firstly, you could draw the graph of these two functions because those two are decreasing, right? So this one should be right. And in this case, if you have something that was negative, which means this one should be smaller. So this is incorrect, right? So what you should do is try to draw the graph of each of this, right? And try to compare them, okay? The third one, this is actually still quadratic inequality because what you could do is to ensure that this cannot be 0, and you could try to transfer it into something look like this. Because divide, the division can be transferred into multiplication, all right? And what you could do is try to reverse the sign in this way, right? And draw the graph and try to determine the range as I mentioned before. Okay, the next one. This one is what I said as the calculation of the logarithmic function. So you have to bear those formula in mind, and you could try to change it in this way, right? And what you could do is use the formula here to move those power in front of it, and to use the I here, where this equals 1, right? So you could simplify the function here. Okay, and this one, try to solve the question of straightening. So as I mentioned before, first one is parallel, the second one is perpendicular, right? So you need to know that if you are given a straight line, how to determine your slope, your intersection with parallel and perpendicular, all right? So surely this one should be C here, okay? This one is what I thought as okay, as function. So, yeah, so as function here, let's see for this part, what you need to do is try to transfer it with those formula of cosine x and sine x, right? So as I mentioned before, there are a family of formula of trigonometric function, which is important. You need to bear in mind. And for example, here, what we could use is that this equals this, right? And you could substitute that into it, and with the angle of 60, I think it should look like this. And you could substitute 60 here, which is this, right? And you could calculate the answer. And also for this part, you know that the angle of cosine and sine, and you are given the range, you need to determine angle of other. For example, here, this is purely you need to combine with your graph, which is 120, right? So this should be 60, so the answer should be A here, right? Okay, and as I mentioned before, you have to make comparison between different equation of those family of the planetic geometry. For example, ellipse, hyperbola, parabola, circle. This one is circle, this one is parabola, hyperbola, ellipse, right? So how to determine them and how to make comparison between them. Okay, this question is for sequences and series. And for this part, we need to know the general term, the summation. And this is what I have emphasized before, is that you will have common ratio, which is negative, right? So here you have common ratio as -1/2. Okay, and vector, this is easy, so I will jump this. So you need to know the operation, the addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, as well as the scalar operation, which is multiplied with a constant, right? Okay, probability. For this one, this is a typical question. You need to draw balls from those facts. For example, you have to draw 2 and 5, and to ensure that both two balls are white, right? So this is your answer, which should be this. Okay, so how to calculate this? You have to know how to calculate permutation and combination, and please review this as well. All right. The last part is question and answer, and also, as it was suggested with your tutor, I could try to choose some lucky boy and girl to try to solve the question together. So any volunteer who want to solve the question, or you have any question?
It's a good chance to communicate with teacher. You can try.
No one here? Or no one have any questions?
Okay, if no one wants to try this question, if you have any other question about math, you can ask Miss Annie here.
Could you show the list of scope? You mean the syllabus? This one, right? You want to know this? Or the other side?
Actually, you can find this math syllabus on CSCA website, but the key point is to master the key knowledge of math. Maybe this time in December, the question is about functions and geometry, but next time the question may be different. So it is not about only one test, it is about the key point. Any other questions? If you cannot use the mic, you can type in the chat window.
If not, I will choose one of you to solve the question with me together. Yeah. What about this? I think this one is interesting. I will choose one of you to solve this question with me together. What about Daisy? Is Daisy here? Daisy is not here. All right. What about John? Is John here? Still not? No one here? Okay, what about the last one? 谢婵玉, are you here? Okay, so if you have any question, you could ask me in your WeChat. If not, I will close the video. Okay.
Okay, a big thank to Miss Ellie. And of course, thank you all of you for turning in live today. And we have prepared exclusive benefits for all of you. Okay, the first one, from today, 5% off discount across the entire CSR platform. That's right. No matter mock test, recorded courses, training programs, everything is 5% cheaper. And discounts, this discount is only valid for 1 week. So you got to act fast. And the second one is that any purchase on CSR gets you 1 free math mock test. So buy anything and the free math mock test is yours. Okay, as we know that CSR mock tests are not average practice papers. Our mock tests are one-to-one aligned with the real CSCA system, same question types, same content scope, same time limits, same syllabus. They are designed to help every student to beat the test anxiety and polish your test strategies. And with over 10,000 questions in the question bank, new questions added all the time. Actually, this is the first discount we have rolled out since the first CSCA in last December. This is your golden chance to grab our training programs. As you can see, this is the courses on our CSR platform. Nearly 200 recorded classes have structured into 4 weeks of target learning, covering all core modules. It is very perfect for short-term sprints and gap filling. Crash your weak points to no time. And all our teachers are graduates from leading domestic and international universities with years of teaching experience at public and international high schools, and many of them are even coaches for math, physics, and chemistry competitions. So you are learning from the best. And our every knowledge point is broken down clearly in the recorded courses. So you can rewatch them as many times as you need. And this is a screenshot of our recorded classes. Don't be worried about the language barriers. All lectures are taught in English with Chinese support. And to cater to our global audience, we offer automatic subtitles in 13 languages. No matter you are from, you will follow along easily. Okay, and our programs are 15 to 20 students in small classes. For each subject, we have 4 to 5 live sessions, just like this one today. And we split the curriculum into units and modules, so we can have more time to practice the high frequency points and walk you through typical question solving strategies step by step. And you can ask questions in real time with your teacher. There is more. You will also get full-time teaching assistant supervision. Our teaching assistants will track your learning programs, send you homework and practice reminders, and share the updated CSCA tips, like the first slide we have seen, right? And some pre-test spots. And we have got you back for every step of the way. Okay. So to sum up, CSR is not just about buying courses, it's about joining a supportive learning community. You will have classmates to learn with and professional mentors to keep you on track. So the 1 week discount window is open now, and you can grab this chance. Okay, thank you for everyone for being here today. Oh, Tasha, I'm not sure whether I say your name right. Tashinga, right? Tashinga Tashi. You can contact Linda, okay, or scan the WhatsApp QR code on this slide. You're welcome. Any other questions? Oh, I just checked the chat history. We also have the scope for physics and chemistry, not only math. Okay, we have three. We have three subjects scope. You can also contact Linda or scan the WhatsApp QR code for our teaching assistants to get every subject scope. Okay. Okay, and if you don't have question for today, so let's call it a day. And thank you again for being here. You can contact our teaching assistant for for any questions in the future. Okay, thank you all. Bye bye.